Jake Wilson was the kind of man who could walk into a room and fix it without anyone noticing, until it was too late to ignore him. At 34, he ran a mid-size electrical contracting firm in the suburbs of Chicago, a business he'd built from a single beat-up van and a toolbox he bought at a garage sale. No trust funds, no family connections, just grit, late nights, and knack for making things work. His hands were calloused, his flannel shirts always smelled faintly of solder, and his laugh was warm, the kind that put clients at ease when a job went sideways. Jake's pride wasn't in plaques or corner offices. It was in the hum of a perfectly wired circuit, the glow of a chandelier he'd hung himself, the quiet nod from a crew who knew he'd never asked them to do what he wouldn't. His life was steady, grounded in the rhythm of 6 a.m. coffee runs, job site walk-throughs, and evenings spent sketching wiring diagrams on a kitchen counter. But there was another side to Jake's world, one that didn't smell like sawdust or feel like his own. That was the world of his wife, Emily Stanford, 32, a rising star at a downtown law firm where everyone seemed to have a last name that carried weight. The Stanfords were Chicago royalty, lawyers, bankers, Ivy League grads with tailored suits and smiles sharp enough to cut glass. Emily was their golden child, all poise and ambition, with a laugh that could charm a boardroom or a charity gala. Jake loved her fiercely, loved the way her eyes lit up when she talked about a case she'd won, loved the quiet moments when she'd curl up next to him on their worn leather couch, her bare feet tucked under his leg. But love didn't erase the gap between their worlds. Jake was a transplant in the Stanford universe, a man who'd traded his steel-toed boots for loafers at their dinner parties, only to feel like he was still wearing a hard hat. Family gatherings at the Stanford's lakefront estate in Evanston were a masterclass in polished exclusion. "Jake, you're so handy," Emily's mother, Ellen, would say, her smile tight as she handed him a flickering table lamp to fix during Thanksgiving dessert. Her father, Richard, a corporate attorney with a handshake like a vice, called him the guy who keeps the lights on every time he introduced him, as if Jake's entire existence was a punchline to a joke no one explained. Emily would laugh it off, her fingers brushing Jake's arm. "They're just teasing," she'd whisper. "They love you." But love, Jake was starting to realize, could feel a lot like tolerance when it came to the side of condescension. He tried to fit in. He showed up to their events, nodded through conversations about stock portfolios and yacht clubs, and ignored the way Emily's sister, Caitlin, rolled her eyes when he mentioned a tough job in Pilsen. He'd spent years proving himself, not just to Emily but to the whole Stanford clan, believing that if he worked hard enough, stayed reliable enough, they'd see him as more than the electrician who married up. He'd wired half their summer house in Michigan for free, fixed a chandelier in their downtown condo when it shorted out during a gala, even helped Richard secure a community sponsorship through Jake's contractor network. Each gesture was a brick in a bridge he thought would lead to acceptance. But the Stanfords never crossed it. To them, Jake was useful, not essential, a tool they picked up when needed and set aside when the job was done. At home, Jake and Emily were different. They'd met 6 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, back when Emily was still a law student who didn't care that Jake's truck had a busted tailgate. She'd laughed at his bad puns, stolen his beer, and kissed him under a string of patio lights he'd rigged up for the party. That Emily was still there sometimes, in a way she'd hum off-key while cooking breakfast or leave sticky notes on his laptop with doodled hearts. But as her career climbed, so did the distance between them. She spent more time at firm events, networking with people who spoke her language, trust funds, mergers, and Martha's Vineyard vacations. Jake didn't begrudge her success, but he felt the shift. Their apartment, a sleek rental in Logan Square, was starting to feel like a stage where he played a supporting role in her story. Jake told himself it was fine. He was the steady one, the guy who didn't need the spotlight. He'd grown up in a small town in Indiana, raised by a single mom who taught him that respect came from what you did, not what you demanded. So he kept showing up, kept fixing, kept believing that love and loyalty would eventually outweigh the Stanfords' sidelong glances. But deep down, something was fraying. Every time Emily laughed off her family's jabs, every time she didn't correct them when they called him the help, it was like a small weight added to a scale he hadn't realized was tipping. Then came the invitation. Caitlin, Emily's younger sister, was getting married at a sprawling vineyard in Napa Valley, a 3-day extravaganza that screamed Stanford prestige. The save the date arrived in a cream envelope with gold calligraphy, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Wilson. Jake stared at it, his thumb tracing the letters. He knew what it meant. They weren't inviting him. They were inviting Emily, and he was the plus one who came with the package. Emily was already buzzing, scrolling through dress options on her phone. "It's going to be gorgeous," she said, her voice bright. "You'll wear that navy suit, right? It makes your eyes pop." Jake's smile nodded because that's what he did. But as he set the invitation on the counter, he felt it, a quiet, nagging sense that this wedding would be more than a weekend. It would be a reckoning. The Napa Valley vineyard stretched out like a postcard, all rolling hills and golden light, the kind of place where dreams were bottled and sold at $200 a pop. Jake Wilson stood at the edge of the reception tent, his navy suit pressed, but already feeling too tight, the weight of the occasion pressing harder than the August heat. He'd driven up with Emily that morning, her excitement filling the car with chatter about Caitlin's wedding, the guest list, the floral arches that cost more than Jake's first truck. He nodded, smiled, even laughed when she teased him about his contractor tan. But now, standing among the Stanford clan and their glittering guests, Jake felt like a prop in a play he hadn't auditioned for. He'd known it wouldn't be easy. Caitlin's wedding was a Stanford production, every detail curated to scream wealth and taste. String quartet by the hedges, waiters in crisp vests gliding with trays of champagne, tables draped in linen so white it hurt to look at. Emily fit right in, her emerald dress catching the light as she kissed cheeks and laughed with cousins who all seemed to have names like Preston or Blair. Jake trailed behind, clutching a thick cream envelope in his jacket pocket. Inside was a check for $10,000, his contribution to the wedding's lighting setup, plus a handwritten card he'd spent an hour drafting. "Caitlin, proud to help make your day shine. Wishing you and Ethan a lifetime of joy." Jake. He'd paid out of pocket, called in favors with his best vendor, even sketched the lighting plan himself to ensure the vineyard glowed like a fairy tale for the golden hour photos. It wasn't just money. It was his way of showing up, of proving he belonged. But belonging was the last thing he felt when the event planner approached, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "Name?" she asked, barely glancing up, her pen already hovering over the list. "Jake Wilson," he said, clearing his throat. She paused, her eyes flicking to him for the first time, then back to the paper. "Right. You're in the auxiliary section." She gestured toward the far edge of the tent, where a row of flimsy plastic chairs sat near the service entrance, close enough to smell the faint tang of garbage bins and diesel from the catering vans. "It's for extended guests," she added, her smile so tight it could have snapped. Jake followed her finger, his stomach twisting as he saw the setup. Gray, wobbly chairs, no table, no name cards, just a makeshift row that screamed afterthought. He looked back at the main seating area, where elegant calligraphy marked spots for the Stanfords and their inner circle. Emily's name was there, at a table near the bridal party, but his was nowhere in sight. He took a breath, forcing a nod. "Thanks," he muttered, because what else could he say? The planner was already gone, her heels clicking toward the next task. Jake walked to the auxiliary section, each step heavier than the last, and sat. The chair creaked under him, the plastic cold through his suit pants. From here, he could see the whole reception unfolding like a movie he wasn't cast in. Guests in tailored linen and heirloom pearls mingled under chandeliers he'd helped wire. The lighting he'd paid for bathed the tent in a soft amber glow, making Caitlin's floral arch look like it was dipped in honey. It was perfect, exactly as he'd planned. But no one knew. No one cared. Then he saw her, Emily, standing near the bridal table, laughing with a man Jake recognized instantly. Tyler Grayson, her ex from Yale, all Ivy League polish and effortless charm. The kind of guy who looked born to wear a tan suit and a Rolex. Tyler leaned in, his hand resting casually on the back of Emily's chair, his smile too familiar, too intimate. Emily didn't pull away. She tilted her head, her laugh carrying across the tent, bright and unguarded in a way Jake hadn't heard in months. He waited for her to glance his way, to wave him over, to do something to bridge the gap between her world and his. But her eyes stayed on Tyler, her hand brushing his arm as she spoke, like Jake was a ghost she'd forgotten to notice. The pain wasn't sharp, not yet. It was a slow, dull ache, like a bruise you don't realize is forming. Jake's fingers tightened around the envelope in his pocket, the check inside feeling heavier than it should. He'd thought this gesture would matter, that it would earn him a place, if not at the Stanford table, then at least in their respect. But as he sat there, the smell of trash mixing with the faint perfume of roses, he started to see it clearly. They hadn't forgotten to seat him properly. They'd placed him exactly where they thought he belonged, on the fringe, out of focus, a footnote in their perfect picture. He scanned the crowd, catching glimpses of the Stanfords in their element. Ellen, Emily's mother, glided between guests, her diamond earrings catching the light Jake had paid for. Richard, her father, raised a glass to someone in a three-piece suit, his laugh booming like he owned the vineyard. Caitlin, the bride, floated in her champagne-colored gown, her smile radiant under the arch Jake had designed. None of them looked his way. None of them ever did. And Emily, she was still with Tyler, their heads bent close, her laughter a sound Jake used to think was reserved for him. A server passed by, offering a tray of bruschetta to the main tables, but skipping Jake's row entirely. He didn't care about the food. It was the oversight, the assumption that he didn't count, that stung like a paper cut. He shifted in his chair, the creak loud enough to make a nearby guest glance over, then quickly look away. Jake's jaw tightened, his mind replaying every Stanford dinner, every handy comment, every time Emily brushed off their jabs with a smile. He'd told himself it was fine, that love meant enduring the small slights for the bigger picture. But sitting here, in a chair that might as well have had nobody written on it, the bigger picture was starting to look like a lie. He pulled the envelope from his pocket, running his thumb over the embossed gold lettering. 10 grand. 3 days of work for his crew, countless hours coordinating with vendors, all to make this day flawless. He'd done it for Caitlin, for Emily, for the family he'd married into. But as he watched Tyler whisper something that made Emily laugh again, as he felt the weight of the auxiliary section pressing down like a verdict, Jake realized something. This wasn't about a seat. It was about what the seat meant. About being invisible in a world he'd spent years trying to belong to. And for the first time, he wondered if belonging was worth the price. The vineyard's golden glow couldn't mask the chill settling into Jake Wilson's bones. He sat in the flimsy plastic chair near the service entrance, the Napa Valley wedding swirling around him like a dream he wasn't invited to. The $10,000 check in the cream envelope burned in his pocket, a quiet reminder of the lighting he'd paid for. The same lighting that made Caitlin's floral arch gleam and cast a warm halo over the Stanford family's perfect tableau. But Jake? He was a shadow in their spotlight, relegated to the auxiliary section where the air smelled of garbage and indifference. Emily, his wife, hadn't looked his way since they'd arrived, her laughter still tangled with Tyler Grayson's smooth baritone at the main table. Jake's grip on the envelope tightened, his calloused fingers tracing the embossed lettering as the ache in his chest grew sharper, less like a bruise and more like a blade. The toasts began, glasses clinking under the chandeliers Jake had helped wire. Caitlin, radiant in her gown, stood with her new husband, Ethan, her voice carrying over the crowd. To everyone who made this day magical, our parents, our friends, our incredible vendors, thank you. The tent erupted in applause, but Jake's name wasn't mentioned. Not a nod, not a glance, not even a vague, and others to acknowledge the man who'd cut margins and pulled strings to make the venue glow. He swallowed hard, telling himself it didn't matter, that he hadn't done it for praise. But the silence stung, a public erasure that felt personal. Then came the moment that turned the sting into a wound. Ellen Stanford, Emily's mother, took the microphone, her diamond earrings sparkling under Jake's lights. This wedding, she said, her voice dripping with pride, is a testament to family, to legacy, to the people who belong here. Her eyes swept the room, pausing on the main tables, on Tyler, on everyone but Jake. Then, as she handed the mic back, she leaned toward a guest and murmured, just loud enough for Jake to hear from his outpost. "Oh, Jake? He's Emily's husband, the electrician. You know, good with his hands." A few guests chuckled, their glances flicking toward him like he was a curiosity, not a person. Emily, standing nearby, caught the comment. She smiled, a quick, practiced curve of her lips, and said nothing. No correction, no defense, just a look that said let it go. Jake's jaw clenched, his heart pounding like a hammer against his ribs. He'd endured their jabs before, Years of handy comments of being asked to fix outlets at Christmas parties. But this was different. This was a stage, a moment meant to celebrate, and they'd reduced him to a punchline in front of 200 people. He scanned the tent, searching for Emily, hoping for a glance that might anchor him. Instead, he saw her with Tyler again, their heads bent close over a shared joke, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. Tyler caught Jake's eye for a split second, his smirk sharp enough to cut. "Nice work on the lights, man," he called across the tent, loud enough to draw attention. "Really sets the mood." The words were a taunt, a reminder that Tyler was center stage while Jake was props. The crowd moved on, the music swelling as couples drifted to the dance floor. Jake stayed rooted, the envelope in his pocket, now feeling like a weight he couldn't carry much longer. He stood, needing air, needing something to dull the roar in his head, and slipped toward the bar near the tent's edge. That's when he heard it, a conversation that wasn't meant for him, but sliced through the noise like a siren. Caitlin, tipsy and giggling, was talking to a bridesmaid near the floral arch. "Emily's always been the smart one," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "She told me last year, if Jake doesn't work out, Tyler's my what if. You know, the one that got away." The bridesmaid gasped, then laughed. "No way. She said that." Caitlin nodded, oblivious to Jake standing just feet away, hidden by a cluster of roses. "Yup," said Jake, sweet, "but Tyler's, well, Tyler." The words hit like a sucker punch, stealing Jake's breath. He froze, his hand gripping the bar's edge, the world narrowing to a single, brutal truth. Emily hadn't just ignored him tonight. She'd been hedging her bets all along. Tyler wasn't just an ex. He was a door she'd left cracked open, a plan B she confessed to her sister while Jake was wiring their lives together. The betrayal wasn't in her laughter with Tyler or her silence at her mother's jab. It was in the fact that she'd already imagined a future without him, and he was the last to know. He turned, his eyes finding Emily on the dance floor. She was swaying with Tyler, their bodies close, her smile soft and unguarded. Jake waited for her to pull back, to set a boundary, but she didn't. The song ended, and Tyler whispered something that made her laugh again, her head tilting back like she was 25 and single. Jake's vision blurred, not with tears, but with clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice, hers, her family's, maybe even his for staying silent too long. He walked back to his chair, the plastic creaking as he sat, the envelope now a lead weight in his pocket. The party spun on, oblivious, champagne flutes clinking, Caitlin's gown shimmering, Tyler's hand lingering on Emily's waist. Jake's mind raced, replaying every moment he'd let slide, every electrician jab, every time Emily brushed off his hurt with a kiss, every time he told himself love meant swallowing the slights. But this was bigger. This was a family that didn't just exclude him, they erased him. And Emily, the woman he'd built a life with, was complicit, her silence louder than any apology could ever be. He stood again, this time with purpose, and moved toward the tent's exit. Not to leave, not yet, but to breathe, to think, to figure out what came next. As he passed the floral arch, Caitlin's voice floated over again, oblivious. "Jake's fine, he'll get over it." He paused, his back to her, his hand brushing the envelope. "Get over it." The phrase echoed, a final nail in the coffin of his illusions. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The betrayal was complete, not just by Emily, but by a family who'd never seen him as anything more than a means to an end. Outside, the Napa air was crisp, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Jake leaned against a vineyard post, the check in his pocket a silent question. What now? He wasn't angry, not in the way that makes you shout or break things. He was awake, the kind of awake that comes when you realize the ground you've been standing on is quicksand. Emily's words to Caitlin, Ellen's public slight, Tyler's taunt, they weren't mistakes. They were truths laid bare under the lights Jake had paid for. And as he stood there, the hum of the party fading behind him, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't go back to being the man who sat in that chair. Jake Wilson stood outside the Napa Valley vineyard, the night air sharp against his skin, the hum of Caitlin's wedding fading into a distant murmur. The $10,000 check in the cream envelope weighed heavy in his pocket, a relic of the man he'd been hours ago, the man who thought generosity could buy a seat at the Stanford table. But the table wasn't real, not for him. The auxiliary chair by the garbage bins, Ellen's cutting remark, Emily's laughter with Tyler, Caitlin's drunken confession about Emily's what-if plan, they weren't slights. They were a verdict. Jake wasn't family. He was a transaction. And as he leaned against a vineyard post, the stars above Napa brighter than the lights he'd paid for, something inside him didn't break. It realigned. He drove back to their Logan Square apartment alone, Emily staying behind for the post-wedding brunch. The Chicago skyline loomed as he crossed the city, its lights a reminder of the jobs he'd wired, the buildings he'd helped stand tall. But tonight, those lights felt different. Not obligations, but proof of who he was. Not the electrician Ellen mocked, not the shadow Emily let fade, but Jake Wilson, the man who built things that lasted. By the time he unlocked the apartment door, the fog of hurt had cleared, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. He wasn't going to shout, beg, or burn bridges. He was going to act, quietly, deliberately, and within his rights. Jake sat at the kitchen counter, the envelope beside him, and opened his laptop. First, he emailed Marcus, his lighting vendor and friend of 10 years. The wedding payment. Hold the final invoice, he wrote. I covered half, but the Stanfords owe the rest. Don't release the equipment until I confirm. Marcus replied within minutes. Got it. You okay? Jake didn't answer the question. He didn't need to. Next, he contacted Sarah, the wedding photographer he'd recommended to Caitlin. There's a dispute with the vendor payments, he said in a calm voicemail. Hold the album delivery for now. I'll follow up. Sarah, who owed Jake for a last-minute gig he'd secured her, agreed without hesitation. Then came the boldest move. Jake opened LinkedIn, his profile a modest list of projects and endorsements from contractors across Chicago. He uploaded a photo he'd taken weeks ago at the lighting warehouse, standing in front of the equipment destined for Caitlin's wedding, his work boots scuffed, but his posture proud. Across the bottom, he typed, proud to light up a Napa Valley wedding. Too bad my seat was next to the trash. No accusations, no names, just a truth that spoke for itself. He hit post, his heart steady, knowing it would ripple. By morning, his phone was buzzing. Texts from crew members, old clients, even a former vendor. That's messed up, Jake. You deserve better. The LinkedIn post had 200 likes, then 500, comments piling up for people he hadn't spoken to in years. Respect for calling it out, one wrote. You're the backbone of every event like that, said another. Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. The post wasn't for validation. It was a line in the sand. Emily texted at noon. Her message as cold as it was brief. You're making this bigger than it is. It wasn't about you. Jake stared at the words, her dismissal sharper than any argument. He replied with a screenshot he'd taken at the wedding, a grainy photo of the seating chart, his name listed under auxiliary. Jake, spouse, isolated from the Stanford tables. Then who was it about? He wrote. She didn't answer. The scene notification was her only reply, and it said everything. Jake's next call was to Lisa, the wedding planner's assistant, someone he'd worked with on a dozen Chicago events. Can you clarify why my contribution wasn't acknowledged? He asked, his voice even. I paid $10,000 for the lighting. Lisa stammered, caught off guard. I'll check with the team, she said. Jake emailed a follow-up, copying Caitlin and Ellen, keeping the tone professional. Please confirm the oversight regarding the lighting sponsorship. I'd appreciate clarity for future collaborations. It wasn't a demand. It was a mirror, forcing them to see their own reflection. The Stanfords didn't respond, but the cracks were forming. Marcus texted that Caitlin's planner had called, frantic, asking why the lighting equipment hadn't been dismantled. They're sweating, he wrote. Sarah confirmed the photo album was on hold, pending Jake's approval. The LinkedIn post hit 1,000 likes, shared by a local event planner with a big following. This is why we need to respect our vendors, she commented. Shame on whoever did this. Jake's name was becoming a quiet rallying cry, not for revenge, but for dignity. Then came the unexpected. Michelle, Emily's cousin and the only Stanford who'd ever treated Jake like family, called from the brunch. Jake, it's a mess here, she whispered, her voice low like she was hiding in a closet. Caitlin's freaking out because the vendors are stalling. Ellen's blaming you, saying you're being petty. And Emily, she's just quiet. Tyler's trying to play hero, but nobody's buying it. Jake leaned back, the apartment's silence wrapping around him. What's Emily saying? He asked. Michelle sighed. She said you'll come around. That you always do. The words landed like a stone. Come around. as if his pain was a phase, his worth a negotiation. That's when it hit. The breaking point wasn't the wedding, the chair, or even Emily's betrayal. It was the realization that he'd been complicit, letting their disregard become his normal. For years, he'd fixed their lights, their events, their egos, thinking reliability would earn respect. But respect wasn't given, it was demanded. And Jake was done waiting. He opened his laptop again, drafting a contract template for future jobs, one that required written acknowledgement of his contributions. No more handshake deals with people who didn't see him. He called his crew, scheduling a meeting to discuss new terms for high-end clients like the Stanfords. "We're not invisible," he told them. "Not anymore." Then he messaged a local business podcast that had reached out after the LinkedIn post, agreeing to an interview about quiet professionalism in the event industry. Each step was small, deliberate, lawful, a reclamation of his voice. By evening, Michelle texted again. "Tyler's out of the brunch. Someone sent your post to his girlfriend. She's not happy." Jake didn't smile. He didn't need to. The Stanford's perfect facade was cracking, not because he'd shouted, but because he'd stopped carrying their weight. The envelope sat on the counter, unopened, a monument to the man he'd been. Jake didn't need it anymore. He wasn't fighting for a seat. He was building his own table. Jake Wilson stood in the backyard of his new fixer-upper on the edge of Chicago's Ravenswood, the smell of charcoal and fresh-cut grass mingling with the laughter of friends. The late spring sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the folding tables covered with checkered cloths, paper plates piled with burgers, and a Bluetooth speaker humming a classic Springsteen track. It was a barbecue, nothing fancy, no gold calligraphy, no string quartets, just real people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they had to. Jake flipped a chicken breast on the grill, the sizzle grounding him, a reminder of the life he'd built in the 10 months since he walked away from Caitlin's wedding in Napa. The $10,000 check, still sealed in its cream envelope, sat in a drawer inside, no longer a wound, but a quiet testament to the man he'd left behind. The ripples from that night had grown into waves. Jake's LinkedIn post, proud to light up a Napa Valley wedding. "Too bad my seat was next to the trash," hadn't just gone viral in Chicago's event circles. It had sparked a reckoning. Vendors, planners, and small business owners shared it, their comments a chorus of respect. "This is why we honor our people. Jake's the real deal." The post hit 5,000 likes, then 10,000, catching the eye of a local business podcast. Jake's interview, titled "The Invisible Backbone of Events," aired to thousands, his calm voice detailing the quiet professionalism of contractors like him and the cost of being erased. He didn't name the Stanfords, didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than spite. The Stanfords felt the fallout. Without Jake's final payment, Marcus, the lighting vendor, held the equipment, forcing Caitlin to pay full price to dismantle the setup. Sarah, the photographer, delayed the wedding album until the Stanfords settled their debts, leaving Caitlin's Instagram bereft of her planned #Stanford wedding posts. The planner's team, embarrassed by Jake's professional email, issued a public apology on their site, citing oversights in vendor credits. Local sponsors, spooked by the online buzz, pulled out of the Stanford-led charity gala, citing reputational concerns. Ellen Stanford's icy emails demanding refunds were met with polite refusals. Jake's network was loyal, and his word carried weight. The family's polished facade, so carefully curated, cracked under the scrutiny of a city that now saw them for what they were, people who used without valuing. Emily was the quietest casualty. Her text after Jake's post, "You're making this bigger than it is," was her last. She didn't reply to his screenshot of the seating chart, didn't call, didn't show up to fight for them. 3 weeks later, she moved in her parents' Evanston guest house, their separation filed with a lawyer's efficiency. Jake didn't beg. He didn't rage. He signed the papers, packed his tools, and moved out. Michelle, Emily's cousin, was the only Stanford who stayed in touch, texting updates. Emily's not herself. She knows she messed up. But Jake didn't need her regret. Her silence at the wedding, her laughter with Tyler, her what-if confession to Caitlin. They were choices, and choices had consequences. Tyler's fall was messy, eh? His girlfriend, alerted by a mutual friend to Jake's post and Tyler's flirting, confronted him at a River North wine bar, her martini glass hitting the floor as she walked out. Word spread, and Tyler's reputation as a charming dealmaker took a hit. A senior partner at Emily's firm, having seen the LinkedIn buzz, sidelined him from a high-profile case, citing optics. Tyler's text to Emily, leaked by a nosy intern, revealed his smug claim, "Jake's no threat. You'll always pick me." Emily didn't respond to him either. Her silence, once a weapon against Jake, now cut both ways. Jake's victory wasn't in their losses, it was in his gains. The podcast led to an offer from Elevate Events, a premium Chicago agency that managed venues across the Midwest. "We want you to lead our vendor relations," their director, Carla, said over coffee in a West Loop cafe. "Not as a contractor, as a consultant. Your post showed us you're more than skills. Your trust." Jake accepted his new role, letting him shape how events were run, ensuring vendors like him were seen, credited, respected. His first act was a contract clause requiring public acknowledgement of contributions, a small change with big impact. He bought the Ravenswood house with his savings, a modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and bad wiring he fixed himself. Late nights with a drill and paintbrush became therapy, each repaired circuit a step toward reclaiming his space. Friends filled the gaps the Stanfords left. Marcus brought beers after work. Sarah shared her latest gig stories. Michelle showed up with her kid for backyard playdates. They didn't ask about Emily or the wedding. They asked about him. And for the first time, Jake felt what it was to be seen for who he was, not what he could do. At the barbecue, Marcus raised a plastic cup, the crowd quieting. "To Jake," he said, grinning, "the guy who taught us family isn't who you're born with. It's who makes room for you." Cheers erupted, cups clinking, someone yelling, "Hell yeah." Jake laughed, raising his soda, the warmth in his chest, not shame or hurt, but belonging. Michelle, holding a slice of her famous peach pie, leaned in. "You're different now," she whispered. "Lighter." Jake nodded. "I stopped carrying their weight," he said. Later, he slipped inside, the envelope catching his eye in the drawer. He pulled it out, running his thumb over the faded gold lettering. 10 grand, a price he'd once paid for a place that never existed. He didn't need to cash it, burn it, or send it back. It was proof, not of betrayal, but of growth. Proof he'd once believed love meant silence, and proof he'd learned it meant standing up. He slid it back, closing the drawer, and stepped outside. The backyard glowed with string lights he'd hung himself, not for applause, but because he could. Kids chased fireflies, Marcus argued over cornhole rules, and Sarah snapped candid photos shouting, "This is your real wedding, Jake." He laughed, the sound free, unforced. The Stanfords were a memory, their empire dimmer without his quiet support. Jake didn't need their table. He'd built his own, surrounded by people who pulled up chairs without being asked, who saw him exactly as he was, a man who'd walked away from invisibility and found his place in the light.